The early morning air in Farage was sharp and unforgiving, but Walter Briggs didn't mind. At 84, he had seen worse. Colder nights under foreign skies, the sound of mortars in the distance, the taste of sand in his teeth as he worked beneath the belly of war machines. His boots crunched along the sidewalk as he exited Margot's deli, a small paper bag in his hands carrying nothing more than eggs, bread, and a pint of milk. Simple things. Things he had earned the right to enjoy in peace. The sun hadn't yet risen high, and the streets were quiet, except for the raucous laughter of a gang of bikers leaning against their chrome beasts, engines idling like sleeping dragons. As Walter passed, his coat brushed lightly against the handlebar of one of the motorcycles. Barely a graze, barely a moment. But in that sliver of time, everything changed. "Watch it, old man," a voice barked, soaked in bravado and beer. Walter turned slightly, ready to apologize, but then a flash, a fist, heavy and sudden, connected with his jaw. The ground met him like a punch to the soul, cold and hard. His groceries scattered, the bread crushed, the eggs a broken mess on the sidewalk. Gasps escaped from the onlookers, but no hands reached to help. He lay there, not just hurt, but humiliated, forgotten. A lifetime of service, 3 tours of duty, commendations and salutes, all reduced to a pitiful silence. People stood with their phones raised, filming, documenting his pain, yet none stepped forward. Their silence screamed louder than the bikers' laughter. Walter didn't cry. He didn't even frown. He simply stood, slowly with a groan that came from his bones and his pride, and dusted off his jacket. There was a storm behind his eyes, but his lips remained sealed. He reached into his pocket, pulled out an old flip phone, and pressed a name saved under Eagle 6. His hand shook, not from fear, but from years, from age. And in that call, the winds of change began to shift. The town of Farage, still sipping its coffee and ignoring a fallen hero, was about to remember what honor looked like. 10 minutes later, the sky cracked open with the thunder of a Black Hawk helicopter. The townspeople looked up, shielding their eyes as the whirring blades kicked dust and leaves into the air. Soldiers descended, fast, focused, efficient. Not a scene from a movie, but from real life. Among them, a man in full tactical gear walked with purpose. Commander Briggs, Walter's son. His face was clenched with fury, masked by discipline, and his heart pounded not with violence, but with the fire of a son seeing his father hurt. He moved through the stunned crowd, found his father's bruised face, and the 2 men exchanged a look. No words, just eyes, just blood and bond. The biker stood frozen now, his earlier swagger gone, sweat beading under his leather vest. The soldiers surrounded him with quiet command. No need for shouts. Commander Briggs stepped forward, looked the man square in the eyes, and said with the calm of a storm, "That's my father. You put your hands on a man who served this country before you were even born." And without resistance, the biker was arrested, led away not just in cuffs, but in shame. The town, once frozen in apathy, now felt the weight of their indifference. People began to move, timidly at first. A woman knelt to pick up Walter's groceries. A young man helped sweep the broken eggs. And slowly, from the corners of the crowd, veterans emerged. Caps in hand, medals on jackets, eyes glassy with tears they didn't want to admit. They formed a line behind Walter. A line of quiet soldiers standing not for war, but for respect, for memory, for him. News spread like wildfire. The video went viral. Veteran assaulted. Son responds in uniform. Headlines blared, but the truth beneath them was deeper. This wasn't about spectacle. This was about a wound, deep and societal, that had festered too long. Walter, with his soft-spoken nature and iron backbone, became a symbol. Not of vengeance, but of dignity, of the forgotten strength still alive in those who had given everything. A week later, the mayor stood with trembling hands and announced that the town's central square would be renamed Briggs Square. Flags waved. A brass band played an old army hymn. Children from local schools held signs that said, "Thank you, Walter." But the most powerful moment came not from the speeches, but from the people. One by one, they walked up to Walter and whispered apologies. Some cried. Others simply squeezed his hand, as if trying to pass their guilt into his forgiveness. Walter accepted them all with grace. Not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to let go. The bell above the bar's entrance gave a faint jingle as the door creaked open. Few heads turned. It was just Bill Harlow. And in this part of town, Bill had long since faded into the wallpaper of memory, an old man with stories too heavy for modern ears. But there was dignity in the way he walked, even if time had bent his spine. At 85, William Bill Harlow was not just an old man. He was a decorated Marine, a first sergeant who had led men through fire and loss, through foreign jungles and barren deserts, through nights so dark that only discipline lit the way. But today he carried only a soft rag in one hand and a folded photo in the other. The bar had changed. What once hummed with the laughter of off-duty cops and veterans now pulsed with the bravado of younger crowds. Bikers mostly. Loud, brash, territorial. They didn't know Bill, and worse, they didn't care to. The past for them was a thing to mock or ignore. Bill walked slowly to the brass plaque behind the counter. His knees cracked as he knelt. The plaque had his name on it and a short inscription, in honor of those who gave their soul to peace. He had polished it every Saturday since the bar was sold years ago. To him, it was sacred. "Hey, Pops," a voice growled from the corner. "This ain't a museum." Laughter erupted. Bill didn't flinch. His cloth moved in steady circles over the plaque, his back to the growing tension. "You deaf or just slow?" another said, rising from his chair. Still, Bill said nothing. Silence had been his armor since Korea, but then a boot scuffed loudly against the floor. Heavy steps, a presence. "I said, old man, maybe it's time you left. You're not wanted here." Bill slowly turned his head. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. He had been hit. He didn't even see the blow. Not the bartender, not the patrons. Just phones turned downward, eyes glued to glasses. Cowardice thickened the air. With shaky fingers, Bill pulled out a phone. He didn't call 911. He called his daughter. On the other end, Major Natalie Harlow answered in a controlled but concerned tone. A veteran herself, now serving as a special operations advisor, Natalie had her father's grit and her late mother's fire. "Dad? Everything all right?" "Nat," Bill said softly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Got a little trouble down at Mendez's." "What kind of trouble?" He hesitated. "The kind that needs eyes, not fists." She was already standing. Her voice dropped into military cadence. "Stay put. I'll be there in 30 seconds. 30 minutes later, the door opened again.